If you want to skip most opening theory and focus on placing your pieces and pawns logically from the start, the exchange variation of the Queen's Gambit is a great choice. It leads to the Carlsbad pawn formation, which might sound quite serious, but the strategy behind it is actually pretty simple. Basically, in the Queen's Gambit, you force your opponent into it as early as move 3 by playing c takes d5. It might look a bit silly, you're voluntarily freeing black's bishop, but in return you take their e for your c pawn, ending up with more pawns in the center. Okay, then we develop our knight, and black does the same. Now we'd like to play e3, but that would simply lock in our bishop. So first we go with bishop g5, pinning the knight and putting pressure on d5. If black does not react, well, we can take on f6 and either win a pawn or terribly weaken their pawn structure. And that's why black usually plays c6 here. Now, if we remove all the pieces except the pawns, we see that the Carlsbad pawn structure is already set up. The first thing to notice there is we don't have the c-pawn, which gives us a bit more space to maneuver on the queenside. Meanwhile, black doesn't have the e-pawn, so they have better chances to create an attack on the kingside. Now, what can we achieve by playing on the queenside? At first glance, black's pawns form a nice chain. But if we challenge it with our b-pawn, that structure could easily fall apart. So essentially, we are attacking with 2 pawns against 3, and that's why it's called a minority attack. And the only condition to play this opening and understand its typical middle game is being familiar with the concept of weak pawn structure. Because all we want is to weaken at least one black pawn on the queenside. Now let's say we already advanced b4 and b5. Black has the choice to either take the pawn or ignore it. If they take, assuming we can immediately recapture, we have the new pawn structure. Notice that the d5 pawn is isolated, which means it's weakened and turns into our target. Also, the b file is semi-open, so black will likely be forced to push b6. Still looks solid, but we can advance our remaining queenside pawn and force black to choose their second weakness. Another isolated pawn, basically, either on b6 or a7. Okay, let's go back and see what happens if they don't react at all. Well, we take on c6 then, and they recapture. Now we have a nice target in the backward pawn on c6, and it's easy to see what to do next. Simply put pressure on that pawn, and basically that's it. If black tries to stop b4 with a5, we just play a3 first, and then b4. The pawns get exchanged and we stick to our plan. After b5, if they take, there are 2 weaknesses right away on b7 and d5. And if they don't take, well, we take on c6 and it's the same story as before. There are various options for black to defend against the minority attack. For example, after white plays b5, they may be prepared to respond with c5. This transforms the pawn structure into an IQP. Still leaves black with a pawn weakness, and once again we have an easy plan to target the pawn on d5. Finally, the most difficult one to deal with is when black at some point plays b5. At first this might seem like a terrible move because they are weakening their c6 pawn. However, black is hoping to exploit the outpost they just created by bringing a minor piece to c4, right in front of their weak pawn. And if that happens, well, we'll lose access to attack the backward pawn. And this knight can get there via e8 and d6. Well, I'm quite sure this won't happen to those of you at the beginner and intermediate level. But just in case, I want to say a few words on how to handle this with white. The first thing to do is make sure you anticipate black's idea before it's fully developed. For example, if you see them move their knight to e8 in this position, you'll know they are going for it, and you might even want to delay the b4 push. Instead, just take a moment to analyze their move logically. Their knight just went to the back rank, and when the enemy's pieces move backwards or aren't developed, we should strike in the center. In this case with f3 and e4, taking advantage of the extra pawn we have there. But since I promised a simple plan that you can rely on in any position, any situation, let's say you just pushed b4 and we see their b5 on the board. The key here is to act quickly and put pressure along the a file with a4. Usually this is what you do right after their b5. Otherwise, they push a5 and we are in trouble. Now, defending against a4, they usually reply with a6. And this is where we need to keep the tension. That's the trick. Bring both of your rooks to the a file, prepare to open it, and infiltrate into the enemy's camp. Also, don't forget that by pushing b5, not just the c6 pawn that gets weakened. Black also creates a weak square on c5, so grab it with one of your knights. Now, from Black's perspective, as we already mentioned, their chances lie on the king side, mainly by placing their knight on e4. This often leads to an exchange of pieces, and once the pawn reaches e4, it boosts Black's attacking potential, as White's f3 knight needs to go. Another great idea for Black in the Carlsbad structure is to lift a rook to the 6th rank, protecting the backward c6 pawn while also aiming at the White's king. It's way better than just having it sitting on c8. Now, these are all just things you should be ready for. Nothing to worry about too much. Just being aware of what your opponent is aiming for while you, as White, build up your attack on the queenside. Now let's go back and take another look at how all this unfolds in our position in the Queen's Gambit exchange variation. We can proceed with e3 here, but I like Queen c2 since it prevents bishop f5. Plus your queen anyway goes to c2 later to keep e4 square protected and make it more difficult basically for Black to play knight e4. Okay, so we have bishop e7, e3, castling, and bishop d3. A bit more precise than knight f3, because this way we keep an option to place that knight on e2 and possibly switch to the plan of expanding in the center with f3 and e4. Of course, in this lesson I'm not recommending you to do that, but it is always better, to keep your opponent unaware of what you're going for. Of course, another reason for bishop d3 is that we are forcing our opponent to do something about their h7 pawn. The main line is knight bd7 to replace the f6 knight in case a bishop takes and thus defend the h7 pawn. Now knight f3 and rook e8, a move that many players do not really fully understand. It indirectly supports knight e4 because after bishop takes c7 and queen e7, the e4 is well protected. It is also making possible for the knight to move to the king side via f8. White castles and Black plays knight f8. The move knight e4 doesn't quite work yet due to bishop takes e4 and Black loses a pawn at the end with bishop takes h7. Sure, Black could have pushed h6 first, hoping to play knight e4 after, but this allows White to retreat the bishop to f4, avoiding any trades on the d8 h4 diagonal. Note that Black isn't too happy with their bishop on e7 as it blocks the e file. Back to the main move, knight f8. And this is where understanding the Carlsbad structure becomes more important than memorizing opening theory. Of course, we want to push b4, and the best move is rook a b1. However, many beginners might opt for a3 instead, with the same idea of course. But can you see the difference and why rook a b1 works better? Well, with a3 followed by b4, black can stop b5 with a6, and suddenly we realize we cannot push b5 without first playing a4, and a4 cannot be played without rook a b1. Essentially, with a3 we lose a tempo. Okay, so after rook a b1, black finally plays knight e4. And here we usually take on e7, they recapture, and then continue with our plan, b4. Note that we never play a4 before b4. That's because with a4, black can stop our queenside expansion and the entire minority attack with the move a5. So definitely b4. The main response for black is a6, and of course we go for a4, preparing to push b5 next. Now there are many options for both sides in this position, but I'll continue with a couple more random moves just to show you how black usually ends up with a weakened pawn structure, so typical for this opening. Say knight g6, b5, a takes b, a takes b, bishop d7, bishop takes e4, d takes e4, knight d2, bishop f5, b takes c, b takes c6, and knight e2. So here it is. The pawn weakness on one end and no weaknesses at all in white's camp. The attack of black on the king side is not there yet, and it overall means white is better. Finally, the move order to enter the exchange variation of the Queen's Gambit that I provided in this video is optional. Usually white develops their b1 knight in this position first. The key is that you take on d5 and black recaptures with the e pawn. And since we are here again, I cannot let you go without telling you to pause the video and think about what white should do after knight bd7. Did black just blunder? Let me know in the comments.